I'd like to invite Mary Nevin up to read now. So Mary's also working on a novel, and the title of this story, I've forgotten the title of this one. Oh yes, The Missing. It's a mystery. Okay.
John awoke in an entangled mass of blankets. Although the bitter cold permeated his skin, a cold sweat broke upon his brow. He reassuringly scanned the familiar, dimly lit room. John tentatively shook the heavy blanket from himself, and bleary-eyed placed each foot upon the thick wooden floorboards. The white mist of his breath evaporated into the stagnant air. He thanked God for the arrival of the new day. He thanked God that he had woken up. The disappearances had haunted all members of the small and rural community nestled high in the mountains. What the inhabitants knew, they spoke of in hushed whispers. His thoughts were disrupted by the mournful howling of wind as it gushed through the billowing forest trees. Nature was no longer as innocent as it had once appeared. The great forest concealed an evil. John quickly dressed and stepped over to the embers of the dying fire. Its gentle radiation warmed his stiff limbs. He reluctantly opened the door and stepped into the mist outside. The warmth and protection of his house were eliminated at once. Winter's presence was everywhere. Snow had engulfed the landscape for as far as the eye could see. When his eyes rested upon the forest, a shiver ran along his spine. He clasped his jacket, pulling it closer around his neck, and continued to trudge through the carpet of ice. John glimpsed the box shapes of the small wooden cabins entombed in a thick layer of snow. Only the erratic appearances of shoveled outdoors were evidence of the fact that they were inhabited. Without realizing John had arrived, he unwillingly removed his hand from the warm enclosure of his pocket and rapped his knuckles on the door. 1 minute, a shrill voice called. John heard a shuffling noise from within. "It's only me, John," he called reassuringly. Immediately, the clunk of numerous padlocks and bolts unlocking filled the chill air. The door creaked open. "Oh God, hello John, I'm sorry." Sarah's gaunt face smiled apologetically. "I thought it was... Oh, never mind, come on in." John stepped into the cabin, and Sarah abruptly closed the door with a deep thud, banishing the outside world. He followed her into the room. An oil lamp flickered on the wooden table, painting the surroundings in a soft yellow glow, hunting the darkness. The child in the corner beamed at him with wild and excited eyes. She stood up and lightly skipped over to him with outstretched arms. Her wild dishevelled hair whirled around her face. John plucked her from the ground and held her close in a warm embrace. "Good morning, Jane," he said, snuggling the child.
Thank you, Mary. 2 rounds of applause. Well done. Okay, I'd like to call, they're all hiding behind the pillar now. Laura, come on up. So Laura Staunton is writing a very gritty, realistic story, and the title of it is Gone.
Colin let out a sigh as he rounded the final corner. This was the feeling he'd been waiting for, the adrenaline kicking in. He increased his pace. The countryside filled with the echoes his feet left pounding off the pavement. He was finally alone, finally free to think. Running had always helped Colin unwind and relax, but lately, since the accident, he'd begun to rely on his talent more, so much so that it bordered on obsession. As Colin descended the hill in the direction of home, he was filled with his usual sense of dread. He slowed to a stroll and looked out at the familiar surroundings. Clouds veiled over the mountains, allowing little light to pour through. It was twilight. He could hear the rasping of the corncrakes in the callows far below, indicating that summer was finally going to arrive. "Almost a year," he whispered to the air. He inhaled deeply and began a brisk jog towards the red brick bungalow. Rex began howling as soon as he approached the gate. Shut up, you stupid dog, it's me. Rex continued to howl. Colin made for the door, ignoring the dog. Reaching forward, he took in a deep breath before reluctantly turning the handle. The creak sounded throughout the house. Colin held his breath. Nothing. Thank God, he said to himself, letting out a sigh of relief. He manoeuvred his way through the hall, dodging the various boxes of his dad's things. Forcing open the kitchen door with his shoulder, he made for the fridge. Wrinkling his nose, he began rummaging. Grabbing a block of cheese, he started to root through the drawers until eventually he produced a knife. The front door slammed, causing Colin to jump. He listened for the footsteps. Loud, ominous thuds caused the floorboards to creak. She was home. Colin stood frozen to the spot like a deer caught in the headlights. There wasn't enough time to break for his room. Beads of sweat gathered on his forehead as she appeared in the doorway. She had a distasteful look on her face as she eyed him up. Her matted hair clung to her cheeks and scalp as she staggered towards the oak table in the centre of the kitchen. Slumping into a seat, she lit a crushed cigarette and took in a long, deep drag before turning to face him again. Her dark, resentful eyes met his, and a chill went down his spine. "Hi, Mum," Colin said solemnly. He held his breath, waiting for her complaining to start. Her face formed a sneer as she flicked her fag into the grubby old ashtray. She had never fully recovered from her husband's death. She was zombie-like, stumbling through the house, only speaking to criticise. She never cried over his death, unable to come to terms with her loss. Colin felt like a constant reminder to her of her old, exemplary life. He wished, above all else, that his mother would return to him. But for now, he would put up with the daily cycle of walking on eggshells. Colin often looked back, remembering how things were before the accident, before the storm erupted, back when he still had a mother and father who loved him and each other. He found it hard to believe that it had only been a year since the accident. He had replayed the crash so many times in his head. A series of electrical storms had occurred within a short space of time. At one point, there had been 3 a day, leaving the entire town of Perth without electricity for over a month. The weather had caused many casualties, but Colin never thought anything would happen to his family. His father was collecting him from the athletics hall after a practice session. They were driving through the woodward path when a flash of blinding lightning distorted their vision. They ploughed into a nearby tree. Branches quaking, the huge tree plummeted to the ground. On impulse, Colin's father applied the brake and swerved. The car skidded and flew through the boundary of the forest down into the ravine. Colin had woken up in hospital 3 days later. His dad was dead and his mother inconsolably silent. "Are you even listening to me?" The harsh hiss of his mother's words brought Colin back to reality. "I said, I was down at the dole office and some young one tried to jump the queue in front of me. Seriously, you people these days think you own the place. Well, I told her to move along, and the cheek she showed me. It was disgraceful." She frantically stubbed the end of her cigarette, almost denting the ashtray. "I tell you now, 'twasn't long before I made the little brat move. Cheek," she grunted as she lit her second cigarette. Colin stood waiting for her to finish her rant, occasionally nodding or expressing outrage and apologising for the atrocities that his generation commit. Eventually, finishing her 20 major, she staggered out of the room towards the cellar. A lump gathered in Colin's throat as he watched her leave. Blinking away his tears, he grabbed his satchel and ran towards the front door, flinging it open.
Thank you, Laura. Very good. Now, I think we've only a few more left, a handful left. Writing. Come on up. So this is inspirational mathematics. She's working on a novel as well. And this is the opening chapter, and it's called The Outsider.
Mam's voice trailed off. She couldn't find the words that would make everything better for me. The truth was that there were no such magic words, something both of us knew. There was silence for a while. Neither of us knew what to say to each other. "I don't want to be late," I said quietly. "Right, yes, of course. Wouldn't want that on the first day." "You okay?" Mam asked, glancing at me quickly as she drove. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, as I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, my fingers contorting themselves into strange knots on my lap. "Never knew you were so flexible," Mam said, nodding to my hands busily twisting themselves around and around. I blushed and quickly disentangled my fingers, placing them neatly on my lap so as to appear cool and collected. I hated people knowing how I was feeling. It made me feel vulnerable, as though I had a weakness. By never showing my emotions, people couldn't see what was going on inside me, which was why my mother's comment bothered me. "You'll be fine, Kate. It's all in the past now." "That's what you think," I thought silently. Sometimes I wondered if she really was that naive, or if she just told herself what she wanted to believe, and hoped that thinking something good meant it was true. I, however, was the opposite. I was always blunt with myself. That was my philosophy. Better to be honest. That way I wasn't setting myself up for disappointment. Still, I had to admit, a small part of me clung to the hope that maybe things would be different this year. After all, a full year had passed since the incident. The road we travelled on was so familiar, the twists and turns greeting me as though I were an old friend who had been gone a long time. The car turned another bend, and I could see the gate coming into view up ahead. Students were clustered around it in small groups, just the same as last year. Bile formed in the back of my throat as I remembered the last time I had walked through those gates, the taunts and jeers that were thrown casually in my direction as I had walked head down, vowing never to return to the place. Yet here I was again, about to do just that. The car pulled to a gentle stop across the road from the school. Mam sighed and turned to face me. Guilt and worry etched across her face. "Look, I know this isn't an ideal scenario, but please," I begged, "don't." Mam managed to smile at me as I gathered my things. I tried my best to match the enthusiasm on her face. It must have worked, because she seemed to think I was okay with everything. At least she didn't offer to hold my hand on the way in, which I took to be a positive sign. The click of the car door as I opened it seemed so loud, the sound sealing my fate. Stepping outside with my bag on my back and shutting the car door behind me, I walked with what I hoped was a confident stride across the road to the gates of the school. At first no one saw me, and my heart jumped for joy. I thought prematurely that this really would be a new start for me. My happiness was quickly crushed, however, as I drew nearer the school, close enough to see the hostile expressions on the students' faces. Girls began to whisper in their groups as I approached, some even running inside to tell their other friends that Kate Riley was back. It was like I had never left.